Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for this invitation. So this paper I want to present today is actually has been recently published. It's about measuring platform bias in the music industry. It's joint work with Joel Waldfogel, who's at the University of Minnesota, and Sarah Waldfogel, who's at the University of Wisconsin. So the motivation for the paper is pretty much about the changes in the structure of the music industry that have occurred since digitization. So what you used to have in the old days was a distribution and promotion were quite fragmented in that industry. So you used to have lots of radio stations dealing with promotion, all of which were quite independent from each other. You used to have record stores that were also independent and working about distribution. What you have today with digitization is a few platforms that collectively dominate both promotion and distribution at the same time. And so this is going to be a paper about Spotify, and within these few platforms that dominate that market, Spotify is clearly the biggest one. Now, on top of this, the digital transformation has also facilitated a true explosion of new creative content, thanks to a decrease in the cost of production of content. So if you open up Spotify today, you will find over 40 million songs available to you. Every week, there is over 40,000 songs that are added to the platform. So of course, as a consumer, this generates a huge product discovery challenge. And so promotion is really crucial in that environment. So how does promotion work on these platforms? Well, the main mechanism in Spotify and on many other music streaming platforms is through playlists. So these are informative lists of songs, so you can obtain information about new songs, for instance, if you follow certain playlists. There are also utilities to just listen to these songs. So you can just listen to all of your music through some playlist that you follow. They're also an important part of this, especially the playlists that are edited by Spotify are considered editorial content, meaning that payola is not allowed. So you're not, as an artist, you're not allowed to pay your way, or you cannot pay your way into appearing on those lists. I'll talk about this in more detail later. Now, what's really interesting is that there is free entry in playlists at Spotify. So anybody is free to create a playlist, of course. But if you look at the data, Spotify really dominates playlists at Spotify. So if you look at the top 1,000 lists in terms of followers, and there's a very high concentration of playlists in terms of followers, the top 1,000 lists, 87% of those are controlled by Spotify, meaning that Spotify decides and is able to decide what to put on those lists. So there's a large power in the hands of Spotify in order to show new songs to consumers through those playlists. And in a previous paper, we've shown that placement and on those influential lists has large impact on the success of both artists and songs. So this is all to say that Spotify really does have power to influence consumption through these playlists. So this is going to be a paper about the power of Spotify and how it exercises that power. So this is really relevant today because more generally we're worried about the fact that online platforms are growing increasingly powerful. So we tend to mention and focus on the GAFAMs. So Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. And the main question there is, whether this power is exercised with some form of bias. So one of the clearest example is Google, which was fined by the European Commission for favoring its own properties. Now, as I said, this is going to be a paper about Spotify, so there's no S in GAFAM, so Spotify is not in there, but you can argue that Spotify is the GAFAM of the music industry. And even though our results are going to be specific to Spotify, our approach, or empirical approach, is also applicable in other platform contexts. Okay, so what's the research question? Just to be very clear. So the question is, does Spotify use its power in a biased fashion? And so we're going to test for bias in playlist rankings, and we're going to focus on one particular set of playlists, the New Music Friday lists. And we're going to ask two questions. The first one is there a bias against indie music? And the second one, is there a bias against songs by female artists? Now, as I said earlier, we typically worry about dominant platforms being biased in favor of their own properties. So Spotify doesn't own music, but major labels have ownership stakes in Spotify. So it could give the platform some incentives to provide some advantage in terms of promotion of their products. Now, if you think about gender, there's no clear, economic incentive to bias according to gender, but there are really important concerns about the treatment of women in the music industry and many others, especially in the wake of the Me Too movement. Now, what we find, which is perhaps a bit surprising, is that Spotify biases its new Music Friday list in favor of indie music and in favor of music by female artists. So happy to talk a bit more about the results later on. All right, so just to give you some background about existing evidence on the topic and real literature really quickly. So there's quite some work theoretically looking at platforms' incentives to bias and the treatment of suppliers. Empirically, there's not a lot of evidence. The main reason being that data is scarce, especially on digital platforms. Detailed data is hard to find. But there are a few papers. So Edelman, for instance, finds that Google has biased its search results in favor of its own properties. Zhu and Liu have this paper looking at whether Amazon enters the markets for products that are established by its marketplace vendors, so the complementers on the platform. And Unol and others also show that travel platforms can rank hotels worse if it charges less off of the platform. And of course, this paper is going to be about playlists, so it naturally relates to product recommendations on platforms and discovery through those tools. So it relates to some of the papers in that area. All right, so this is kind of the roadmap for today, the roadmap I have planned. So I want to give you some background about especially the new Music Friday list that we'll look at, and then tell you about how we're going to test for bias, give you a bit of a model of what we have in mind, and then I'll present you the data and the empirical approach and results before concluding. Okay, so promotion at Spotify. So as I said, there's a huge amount of new songs available on Spotify. You probably all know this if you have a Spotify account. And Spotify decides which songs to feature and promote on their playlists. And as I said, there's free entry, but the widely followed lists are all controlled by Spotify. So they can basically decide who gets more attention on the platform through those lists. And this list can take two forms broadly. So they can either be algorithmic or curated, meaning a human being, a Spotify employee will decide what to put there. So this paper is not going to focus on algorithmic playlists, but only on curated lists, and specifically on one type of list, which is the new Music Friday playlists, which again are edited by Spotify employees and are also country specific. So you have New Music Friday Germany, New Music Friday Spain, for instance, which are all edited in a country-specific way. Now, what's the peculiarities of these lists? They focus on newly released music. So all the songs that enter into the New Music Friday list are new to the platform. So they're new songs, but they can be by established artists, or they can also be by brand new artists as well. And so the idea is that the curators of these lists, they're going to include on these lists songs for which they wish to bring the users' attention to them, right? So out of the thousands of songs that enter Spotify every week, these curators are going to pick 50 songs and they're going to rank them. And these lists are going to stay there for 7 days. And so every Friday, these lists are completely updated. Now, it's a list that is influential. So it has it's the seventh most followed playlist on Spotify. It has 9 million followers, probably more now, across countries, across the countries we look at. It also has a large impact on streaming success, not only for new songs, but also for new artists. This is something we've shown in some previous work. And also, according to industry sources, there's, they are an important part of launching any new song, in particular because they improve the probability that you would appear on other important playlists on Spotify. So even if we are focusing on a single list, they're a very important entry point for any new song on the platform if you think about future success. Okay, so how do we test for bias? So obviously this is quite tricky. There's broadly two approaches. Let's think of the questions. Are playlist rankings biased against indie music? So think of a list with 50 songs ranked, and you want to know whether indie songs are biased against on those rankings. So there's two ways to do this. The more traditional way is what we call the conditional unobservables approach. And the idea here is to regress a measure of ranking, the ranking that songs get on those lists, and to regress that on a dummy for the label type, for instance, or a dummy for being on an indie label. And of course, the tricky part is to be able to control for as many as relevant variables that account for the commercial promise of the song. So for instance, past success of the artist or song characteristics, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea is that once you are able to control for all the relevant characteristics, then you could interpret that coefficient as bias. But of course, the problem with this approach is that this apparent bias that you may find may actually reflect the fact that you haven't been able to control for all the relevant stuff, and it's actually just a correlation with unobserved factors. So this first approach, we're not going to rely on it very much. We're just going to compare it with the second one I'm just going to talk about now. But we're still going to use it as a way of showing that it's probably not a good idea to rely on it. Now, the second approach that we use, and that is the focus of the paper, is an outcome-based approach. And here the idea is to compare the ex-post performance of an indie and a major song that were assessed to have equal promise. So if the two songs were assessed to have equal promise, and if, for instance, the major song ends up outperforming indie song, then it means the ranking was biased against majors, since this major song should have gotten a better rank to start with. Okay, and so that's going to be the main test that we're going to do in this paper. And as I said, we're going to use also the first one just to compare the two approaches and provide some evidence that the first one is probably not a good idea to rely on. All right, so what data do we have? So we have data on the top 20 entries for the New Music Friday playlist. So as I said, there's 50 entries on New Music Friday. We only rely on the top 20 because, again, in our previous paper, we've shown that beyond top 20, it doesn't really matter. There's not any impact of appearing on those ranks. We have those data for 26 countries from April 2017 until the end of that year. That's about 15,000 entries and for a total of 5,700 distinct songs. And we're going to observe kind of two measures of streaming success during the 52 weeks following list inclusion. So for each song that enters at some point New Music Friday list, we observe throughout the following year whether the song appeared in a specific country's daily top 200 Spotify charts. And if it appeared on that charts, we observe how much it's streamed. So we can say for each song that enters New Music Friday list, did it appear on the top 200 in the following year, and how much did it stream? And of course, we're going to have a measure of the label status of the song, whether it's a major or an indie, and we're going to have a measure of the gender of the song that's based on the gender of the artist. I'll say more about that in the next slide. We also observe measures of song promotion at Spotify. So of course, when a song is added on New Music Friday list, it may also be added on other playlists. And so we're going to rely on that information as well. So we can observe on which other list song is added and how many followers these other lists have. So that's going to be useful later on. Now, the gender definition. So what we did basically is to look at the gender of the artists of each song. So we crossed, the name of the artist with information from, social security databases or databases providing gender on name, basically. And so we're going to code individual artists as male or female if we can ascertain their gender. If we can't, we're just going to say it's unknown. So our measure is for a measure of perceived gender. It's what people or as ourselves perceive as the gender of the artist. For bands, we're going to code a band as male if all prominent artists are male, or female if they're all female, and otherwise we're just going to call it mixed. And so we're going to define a song as female if the first artist is female, in case there's a single artist on the song. In the case of songs with two artists, we're going to say that the song is female is the first artist is female and the second is either female or mixed. And in the paper, you can see more robustness on other gender definitions if we, from being more restrictive to less restrictive, and the results hold based on that. Okay, so let me provide you with a model, a simple model of playlist ranking, just to clarify ideas. So imagine a playlist curator that has to decide on the assignment of song ranks. So your playlist curator for New Music Friday, you have 50 songs and you have to decide how to rank them. Now we're going to assume that songs differ in their likability. So that's the tendency for people to further consume the song once they're exposed to it. So we're going to call that LJ for song J. And on top of this, each song is going to get some amount of exposure depending on the rank that they get on that list. And we're going to assume that the better the rank, the more exposure you get. So this is given by this expression here, where A and B are constants, and R is the rank. So based on these two elements, the expected stream for song J when it's ranked R is simply going to be the product of that likability and that exposure. So that's for one song. Now the total expected stream from the 50 playlisted song is going to be just the sum of these expected streams. And so that's just provided by that expression. Now we are going to assume that a curator on those lists has as an objective to maximize the total streams on that playlist. Okay. And I'm going to provide you with some evidence later on that this is very likely to be the case. And so if that's the objective of the curator, then the curator should rank the songs according to likability. So the song that is the more likable, which has the highest L value, should go first. The second most likable song should go second, etc. Now, of course, we don't observe likability, but we do observe something, the result of likability, which is streams. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this in a few slides. Okay, so where is bias in this? So how do we incorporate bias in that story? So we're going to first define bias as a ranking that deviates from stream maximization. And so for that, we're going to allow curators to assign different weights to different type of music. So suppose a curator puts a different weight on indie music versus major music. We're going to call that weight psi. Now, instead of maximizing total expected streams, the curator will maximize expected weighted streams. So that's going to be the sum of weighted streams for major and indie songs. And again, this psi is the relative weights put on indie songs. And this is all to say that if the curator is biased, then instead of ranking songs by likability, just by LJ, it's going to rank songs according to that expression here. So this means that there will be some deviation from ordering simply by likability if the curator is biased. Okay. Okay, so just an aside on cost and bias as well. So it's very possible that some songs, some types of song have a different cost to Spotify. So Spotify, every time a song is played, has to pay royalties. It's possible that when an indie song is played, the royalty rates is lower than when a major song is played, for instance. Now, if this is the case, a profit maximizing creator might want to rank according to cost. And if the indie songs are cheaper, then it may want to give better placement to indie songs on that list. Now, in that case, this psi would have quite a bit of a different interpretation. because it would also reflect differential benefits less those costs. But as I said at the beginning, these new Music Friday lists, just as any other editorial list by Spotify, are editorial content, so they're not advertorial content. And this means that the ranking they show should not be based on cost. And as a matter of fact, Spotify makes very clear that no one can pay their way in one of these lists. Nevertheless, if this was still driving the results, we would still interpret differences in ranks based on cost differential as bias, but it would be a different type of bias, since it would be more kind of payola, because cheaper songs would get beneficial treatment. So that's just in terms of how you would interpret that psi value. All right, so the empirical approach. So as I said earlier, the outcome-based approach that we take, and based on this model I presented, this assumes that curators are maximizing total streams, and so this means that the ranks that they give are reflections of their likability assessment, and so the simple question is, do curators actually order songs in order to maximize streams? So here's some evidence in favor of that view, or to corroborate that assumption. So here, what you observe is on the horizontal axis, the rank on the new Music Friday lists, and on the vertical axis, a measure of success of this song. So whether the share of these songs that appear in the top 200, or the total streams, the log of the streams that they obtain. What you can see is that there's a monotonic relationship between streaming success and rank. So songs that are better ranked are also more successful, which is evidence in favor of curators giving better ranks to songs they expect to perform better. Now, there might also be a causal part to this story, meaning that songs are more successful because they get better ranks. And this is indeed what we looked at in our previous paper. But what we found is that about half of this effect is causal. So there's still kind of a prediction explaining that relationship. One other way you could look at this, if you think that past success is predictive of future success, which is the case if you look at the data. So past artists that were successful in the past tend to be successful in the future as well. In that case, a curator that wants to maximize streams may want to give better ranks to songs by artists that used to be successful. And indeed, this is what you observe here. Curator give better ranks to songs whose already are larger success in 2016. So that's 1 year before our data is analyzed. Okay. So all of this is to say that this is evidence that curators rank songs as if they were broadly trying to maximize eventual streams. And I say broadly because there's going to be some deviations from this maximization, which is going to be the result of bias. Okay. Okay, so just to recap a bit on the outcome-based test. So literally, this is a test for bias in the assignment of ranks. And the idea is to ask whether two songs that a curator gives the same initial assessment of quality as measured by the rank they're given, ultimately experience the same degree of ex post success as measured by the streams. Okay, so if, for instance, you want to ask, do indie songs end up streaming less than major label songs, conditional on the rank assigned? If this is the case, then the assignment of ranks is biased against major songs, since they deserved a better ranking. Okay. So we can look at this in kind of in a very descriptive way, based on graphs that are very similar to the ones I just showed you, but splitting songs by indie versus major. And as you can see here, conditional on New Music Friday rank, indie songs have less streaming success. So at every rank, major songs always outperform the indies. And this is, again, true across the ranks from 1 to 20 here. You can look at the same picture for gender. And again, here, conditional on the rank, female songs have less streaming success. And it's particularly true for the lower part of the ranking. Okay. So again, this is consistent with creators being biased in favor of indie and female music. Okay, so this was all very descriptive, even though that's pretty much all the results from the paper are there. But we can implement this via regression. So we're going to estimate the following specification, which is quite straightforward. So we have a dependent variable, which is a measure of streaming success. As I said, this is going to be either whether the song makes the top 200 in country C at some point during the year after they entered the New Music Friday list, or the log of cumulative streams in that country after they entered. We're going to regress that on two measures on dummies for whether the song is on indie label and female, control for rank, that's the whole point, and control for country fixed effects as well. And so we are interested in those two coefficients, which are going to tell us whether these rankings are biased or not. All right, so this is a table giving you the results based on these two outcomes. So that's whether you make the top 200, and that's the log of streams here. And as you can see, both female and indie songs show negative coefficients, meaning that they receive lower streams conditional on rank, which again indicates bias in favor of indie and female songs. The effects is also larger for labeled and gender, as was shown in the descriptives. Now you may have noticed that there's two panels in this table. This first one controls for rank by including rank fixed effects. This one controls for rank simply linearly. And the reason to do that is that we can infer the magnitude of the bias when controlling for the rank linearly just by looking at the coefficients, the ratio of these two coefficients. So here, for instance, these coefficients tell us that indie songs have about 0.96 less streams conditional on rank, and at the same time being ranked one worse is associated with 0.48 fewer log streams. So how many ranks should you get to get that difference in streams? Well, the answer is given by the ratio of these two. So indie songs are giving preferential treatment that is equivalent to them receiving ranks that are better by 1.97. Now, the reason why we're interested in that number is because we want to compare that with our first test for bias, the one I crossed in my slide and said it wasn't really reliable. We're still going to look at that and see to be able to compare the results we get to those ones. So keep that 197 in mind. It will come up in a couple of slides as a comparison. Okay. All right. So now this was for the outcome-based test. Now I just want to kind of make a parenthesis talking about the conditional unobservable test. That was the first test I mentioned, which, as I said, should not be relied on too much. Just to explain again, here the idea is that you look at whether indie songs get better ranks conditional on all relevant factors affecting commercial promise. And this is probably not a good idea because you would never know if you have control for anything you should have control for. And so the apparent bias that you may find may reflect correlation with unobserved factors. Nevertheless, we can still estimate those things and compare these coefficients with that ratio of coefficients I just showed you earlier. So if we estimate those, this model, this is what we obtain. And this approach would suggest that there's a pro-female and an anti-indie bias. So here, for instance, the coefficient on indie labeled songs is positive, meaning that indie labeled songs tend to get worse ranks according to that test. But if you remember, as I said, this 1.97, according to the outcome-based test, there was discrimination against in favor of indie labeled songs. So what we can do is have all these estimates and compare whether they're statistically different or not. And what we find, if you look at this part of the table here, is that we reject the equality of the rank bias that's estimated with the first approach with the outcome-based test most of the time, so 3 out of 4. So we take this as empirical evidence of the shortcomings of the conditional unobservable approach. So there were already quite some reasons to doubt that approach, just based on the idea that it's hard to control for all the elements you want to control for, but this is a table just providing a bit more evidence that this is probably not a good idea to just rely on that type of test. All right, so basically this is to say that, the outcome-based test is what you should rely on. Now, you might worry about one particular issue is that it might be that what we find is the result of better promotion by the majors. So essentially what we find is that indie and major songs that get similar ranks, ultimately major songs end up streaming more. We interpret this as bias, but it might be that, during that year, majors are better at promoting. And so that's why major songs end up streaming more. And so we want to make sure that our results are not driven by that extra promotion or potential extra promotion. So we have two ways of dealing with that. The first one is to, instead of focusing on, the success 1 year after entering the New Music Friday list, we're just going to focus on success during the week in which the New Music Friday, the song is added on New Music Friday list. This means that this test should really not be contaminated by feedbacks between streaming success and endogenous promotion on other Spotify lists, for instance. So that's the first way to deal with this. The second one is simply to also control for promotional activity. As I mentioned earlier, we also have data on how many other playlists you're added when you're added on New Music Friday list and how many followers do these playlists have. So we're gonna basically look at those two robustness checks, separately and together. So this is a first table showing you still focusing on ultimate success, meaning the success of a song entering during the year after they enter, and here controlling for additional promotion on the platform. And what you can see is that the coefficients are pretty much the same when you control for, for the followers on other playlists on which you appear or not. And this is a similar exercise. Instead of focusing on ultimate streaming success, focusing on initial streaming success, so only during the week in which you're added to the list. And as again, the coefficients are nearly identical. So this provides some evidence that our results should best be interpreted as biased rather than these differences in promotion between, for instance, indie and majors, or perhaps men and women artists. So again, strong evidence of bias in favor of indies and music by female artists. Now, another thing we can do is actually identify the degree of bias directly. We can estimate that. So the psi value that I mentioned in my model, which was the relative weight put to some, for instance, indie music relative to major music by the creator, we can estimate that econometrically. And the idea is as follows. So if you look at that sketch, that graph, which pretty much represents what I showed you in the descriptives. So here in that case, what you observe is that the average streams for indie songs, so the dark bar here represent indie songs. The average streams for these songs are lower when they're ranked second than the average streams for major songs ranked third. So this is evidence of bias against major label songs. Now, how can we rationalize that ranking? Well, if a curator puts some extra weight on the indie songs, and meaning the creator is biased in favor of indie songs, then we can rationalize that ranking. And in particular, the weight that the creator puts on that set of songs should make the height of that bar just as high as this one, right? In order for the ranking to be rational. Now, of course, any large enough value of psi will make the bar high enough. But of course, in order for the ranking to be rational, it can also not be higher than the average streams for major songs ranked first. So we're going to have bounds on the value of psi that will allow us to actually estimate it econometrically. Okay, so the idea is to look at expected streaming success of majors and indie songs in that particular example for songs that are at adjacent ranks and rely on these bounds to estimate psi. Okay. So we're going to implement this by simply averaging across all of the country weeks in the data. So we're going to calculate the streams for indie songs at different ranks and for major songs at different ranks. And then we're going to find the value of psi that minimizes the violations of these two inequalities. And so we're going to do this for both label types, so looking at estimating the psi for indie versus majors, and also for gender, estimated that value for women versus men music. And we're going to use our 4 measures of streaming success to do that. So if we do this, what we find is that curators appear to rank songs as if they attached 40 to 45% more weight to indie label streams. And for gender, curators rank songs as if they attached about 8 to 17%, depending on what measure of success you use, more weight to female artists' streams. Okay. All right. So let me conclude and maybe discuss a bit the results. So what we do in the paper, we use an outcome-based test for bias, which avoids the challenges of the traditional conditional unobservables approach. And so in that model, what we do is we use playlist ranks as ex-ante measures of quality assessment, so how much people will like the songs, and streams as measures of ex-post success. What we find is that Spotify's New Music Friday lists are biased in favor of indie music, as well as indie music by female artists. Now, of course, we only focus on one single playlist, so we can't rule out that other playlists may have other different sorts may favor all different sorts of music. What's interesting is that our findings are kind of at odds with what you hear about industry critics on anti-indie and anti-female bias. Now, what's really important, I really want to stress this out, is that our results do not mean that these groups face a generally welcoming environment in the recorded music industry. And as a matter of fact, there are really strong reasons for concern that female artists are underrepresented among successful artists. There's also data on this. And so what our results can speak of related to this is that simply the New Music Friday lists do not add to that concern. But indeed, it doesn't mean that generally the environment is favorable to indie and female artists. Just want to make that very clear. Now, the next question, I guess, is why would Spotify be biased in favor of these groups? So here we don't have strong evidence on this, but we have kind of 2 pieces of speculation. So the first one is that Spotify may be actually responsive to the criticism received by the industry. So it may lead them to actively promote work from women artists or indie artists. One example is the partnership that Spotify had with Smirnoff a few years ago, called the Smirnoff Equalizer, which provided users with an analysis of their listening composition in terms of gender. So this is kind of evidence that they care about those issues. Another possibility is that promotion of indie music may actually help deconcentrate market power from the major labels on the platform and create a future environment that is better for streaming rate negotiations between Spotify and the labels. So if Spotify is able to negotiate more favorable terms with indie labels compared to the majors, then Spotify may have incentives to actually stimulate promotion of indies. As I said, this is purely speculative, so we don't have evidence to back up those claims, but these would be consistent with the results, right? And so lastly, as I mentioned at the beginning, our results are obviously specific to the context of Spotify lists, but the approach we use might be applicable in other platform contexts. So what you need if you want to measure the bias of an agent, again, is a measure of the ex-ante assessment of a product commercial prospect and a measure of ex-post commercial success. And these elements are typically available in platform context. Now, whether you have access to this data is a different question, but if you're lucky enough to have access to such data, then it's quite I would say, easy to implement that approach. So if you think about Google, for instance, their organic search results are supposed to rank links by their quality, so reflecting the user's tendency to click through. So if conditional on the others of the search results, if the links to Google's own pages had fewer clicks, then that could be interpreted as pro-Google bias. But you can think about other settings where rankings are used, which is the case in many online platforms. You can think about Amazon, which obviously uses a lot of rankings, Booking, Expedia, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so I think I'm right out of time. So thank you all for your attention. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to discussing this with you all. Thank you.